Some moments split your life into before and after. For Chris Martinez, that moment came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Portland when a woman in a wedding dress threw herself in front of his pickup truck. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Chris had been driving slowly through the Pearl District, his 8-year-old son Tyler chattering in the back seat about his upcoming science fair project on volcanoes. The traffic light ahead glowed red, and Chris was already slowing down when she appeared. A flash of white silk and desperation, running between parked cars like her life depended on it. Her wedding dress billowed behind her, the train catching on a car mirror as she stumbled into the street directly in front of his truck. Chris slammed the brakes so hard his toolbox slid forward in the bed, metal clanging against metal. Tyler's juice box went flying. The woman hit the pavement hard, her dress spreading around her like spilled milk. Through his windshield, Chris could see her face streaked with mascara, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She looked back toward the elegant hotel across the street with pure terror in her eyes. That's when Chris noticed the man in the tuxedo. He stood in the hotel's entrance, scanning the street with predatory intensity. Even from a distance, there was something wrong about the way he moved, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The man's eyes swept past Chris's truck once, then snapped back. He'd spotted the white dress. Chris didn't think. He threw the truck in park, jumped out, and was beside the woman in seconds. She was trying to stand, her hands shaking as she gathered her skirt. Up close, he could see a bruise forming along her collarbone, partially hidden by the lace of her dress. "Please," she whispered, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "Please don't let him find me." Behind them, Tyler had pressed his face to the window, his science project forgotten. Chris could hear the man in the tuxedo calling out across the street, his voice carrying an edge that made Chris's skin crawl. "Emma! Emma, get back here right now!" The woman, Emma, flinched at the sound of her name like she'd been struck. "He'll kill me," she said so quietly Chris almost missed it. "If he gets me back in there, he'll actually kill me." Chris looked at this stranger in her ruined wedding dress, at the fear in her eyes that was too real to fake, at the way she kept glancing toward the hotel like she was watching for a monster. Then he looked at Tyler, who was supposed to be at his grandmother's house in 20 minutes for dinner and homework help. Chris Martinez had always been the kind of man who helped strangers change flat tires and returned wallets with all the cash still inside. But standing in downtown Portland traffic with a terrified bride clutching his sleeve, he realized some choices carried consequences that would ripple through every corner of his carefully constructed life. The man in the tuxedo was crossing the street now, weaving between stopped cars with determined strides. Chris could see his face clearly, handsome in a sharp-edged way but with eyes that held no warmth. This was someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, and what he wanted was Emma back. "Sir, we need to move," Tyler called from the truck, his 8-year-old voice cutting through Chris's racing thoughts. "Grandma's making her special meatloaf tonight, and you said we couldn't be late again." Emma's grip on his arm tightened. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to pull away. "I shouldn't have. This isn't your problem. I'll figure something out." But Chris had seen enough domestic violence calls during his years as a volunteer firefighter to recognize the signs. The careful way Emma held herself, the practiced apology in her voice, the bruise that makeup hadn't quite covered. This wasn't a case of cold feet or wedding day nerves. This was survival. "Get in the truck," Chris said quietly. "What?" "Get in the truck. Now." Emma stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. If he sees you helping me." "Lady, I'm a construction foreman who spends his days dealing with angry contractors and temperamental machinery. I can handle one guy in a fancy suit." Chris opened the passenger door, his eyes never leaving the approaching figure. "But we need to move. Right now." Emma gathered her skirts and climbed into the cab just as the man in the tuxedo reached the truck. Chris was closing the door behind her when a hand grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around with surprising force. "That's my wife," the man said, his voice cultured but carrying an undertone that made Chris's muscles tense. She's having a bit of an episode. Wedding day stress, you understand. I'll take her back now. Up close, Chris could see the expensive watch, the perfectly styled hair, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, but he could also see the barely controlled rage simmering behind the polite facade. She doesn't look like she wants to go with you, Chris replied evenly. The man's smile never wavered, but his grip on Chris's shoulder tightened. I'm Dr. Marcus Keller. Perhaps you've heard of the Keller Medical Foundation? My family has significant connections in this city. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings about who was interfering in private family matters. It was a threat wrapped in silk, delivered with the kind of casual menace that spoke of practice. Chris glanced back at Tyler, who was watching the entire scene with wide eyes, then at Emma, who had shrunk against the far door of the truck like she was trying to disappear entirely. This was the moment. Chris could apologize, hand Emma over, and drive away to his predictable life of construction deadlines and single parenthood. Tyler would get his science fair project done, they'd eat Grandma's meatloaf, and Chris would tuck his son into bed with a clear conscience because he'd minded his own business. Or he could trust his instincts about the woman trembling in his passenger seat and the man whose touch felt like a promise of violence. Chris stepped back, breaking Marcus's grip on his shoulder. Like I said, she doesn't look like she wants to go with you. He climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled away from the curb before Marcus could react. In the rearview mirror, he watched the man in the tuxedo standing in the middle of the street, his polite mask finally slipping to reveal something much darker underneath. Thank you, Emma whispered from the passenger seat. I don't know why you did that, but thank you. Chris glanced at Tyler in the rearview mirror, then at the woman beside him who was still shaking despite the truck's warm interior. Because sometimes doing the right thing is the only choice that lets you sleep at night, he said. Even when it's the hardest one to make. Chris had learned early that life could shatter without warning. The first time was when he was 12. Watching his father pack a suitcase while his mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, saying nothing. The second time was 3 years ago, when the oncologist delivered Elena's diagnosis with the kind of clinical detachment that made devastating news sound like a weather report. But those experiences had taught him something valuable. When the world falls apart, you focus on what you can control. After his father left, Chris had controlled his grades, his after-school job, his determination to be nothing like the man who'd walked out on his family. After Elena's death, he'd controlled Tyler's routine, the bills that needed paying, the careful balance of grief and hope that single parenthood demanded. Now, driving through Portland's afternoon traffic with a runaway bride in his passenger seat and his 8-year-old son asking increasingly complicated questions from the back seat, Chris wondered if he'd finally encountered something beyond his ability to manage. Emma had stopped shaking, but she kept glancing at the side mirror like she expected Marcus to materialize behind them. Her wedding dress, which probably cost more than Chris made in a month, was torn at the hem and stained with street grime. The contrast between the expensive silk and her obvious terror created a picture that didn't quite fit together. "Where can I take you?" Chris asked as they stopped at a red light. "Family? Friends?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "My family planned this wedding. My friends think Marcus is charming and successful. Everyone thinks I'm the luckiest woman alive." She touched the bruise on her collarbone absently. They don't see what happens behind closed doors. Tyler leaned forward between the seats, his natural curiosity overriding any sense of awkwardness. "Why did you run away from your wedding? In movies, people only do that when they realize they love someone else." "Tyler," Chris warned, but Emma turned to face the boy with the first genuine smile Chris had seen from her. "It's okay," she said. "That's a fair question. Sometimes adults make promises to people who turn out to be different than they thought, and sometimes those people can be dangerous. Like the bad guys in Dad's police shows? Something like that." Chris pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, needing a moment to think. The afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, highlighting the exhaustion in Emma's face. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "I should explain," she said quietly, "about what you've gotten yourself into." Chris turned off the engine. "I'm listening." Emma's story unfolded like a case study in psychological manipulation. She'd met Marcus Keller 18 months ago at a medical charity gala where she'd been working as an event coordinator. He was everything her mother had always told her to look for. Successful, sophisticated, from a prominent Portland family with connections reaching into city government and the medical community. The courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, and introductions to influential people who treated Emma like she'd won some kind of lottery. Marcus was charming in public, attentive and generous. He paid off her student loans without being asked, moved her into his downtown penthouse, and proposed with a ring that belonged in a museum. But Private Marcus was different. He needed to know where she was every moment of the day. He chose her clothes, her friends, her schedule. He had opinions about everything from her hairstyle to her relationship with her sister in Seattle. When Emma pushed back, he explained it was because he loved her so much, because she was too trusting, because the world was dangerous for someone so naive. The physical control came gradually. A hand on her arm that gripped too tight when she talked to other men. Fingers that left bruises when he guided her through social situations. Sex that had nothing to do with her consent, and everything to do with his need to possess. When she tried to talk about it, he reminded her how much he'd done for her, how ungrateful she was being, how no one would believe her anyway. "This morning, I overheard him on the phone," Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was talking to someone about the honeymoon, about how once we were married, he wouldn't have to be so careful anymore, about how wives couldn't testify against their husbands, and how accidents happened all the time." She met Chris's eyes in the rearview mirror. "I realized he was planning to kill me. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. When he got tired of the game." Tyler had gone very quiet in the back seat, processing this information with the seriousness only children could bring to adult problems. Chris felt the familiar surge of protective anger that came with recognizing a predator, the same feeling he'd had when Tyler's teacher had mentioned the school bully who'd been targeting smaller kids. "So you ran," Chris said. "I ran. Right out of the church, in front of 300 guests, including the mayor, 2 judges, and half the hospital board." Emma's smile was rueful. Not exactly subtle. Chris understood now why she'd been so terrified, why she'd thrown herself into traffic rather than go back. Marcus Keller wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. He was a connected, powerful man who'd been slowly isolating Emma from anyone who might help her. The kind of man who could make problems disappear, who had the resources and influence to hunt down a runaway bride and drag her back. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Where are you?" "Tyler's dinner is getting cold." Chris looked at his son, who was studying Emma with the same intense focus he brought to his volcano project. Tyler had Elena's eyes and her gift for reading people. Even at 8, he understood that some situations required more than just following the rules. "Dad," Tyler said quietly, "we have to help her." It wasn't a question. Tyler had inherited Elena's moral compass along with her eyes, the kind of unwavering certainty about right and wrong that made compromise impossible. Chris had spent 3 years trying to shield his son from the world's darkness, but Tyler had been exposed to enough loss to recognize genuine danger when he saw it. Chris's own story was simpler, but no less defining. He'd grown up in working-class Portland, the son of a mechanic who drank too much, and a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital to keep them afloat. When his father left, Chris had stepped up, working construction jobs after school to help with bills, learning early that reliability and hard work were the only currencies that mattered. He'd met Elena at Portland Community College, where she was studying to be a teacher, and he was taking night classes in engineering. She'd been everything he wasn't: optimistic, middle class, confident that the world was fundamentally good. She'd seen something in the serious construction worker who sat in the front row and took meticulous notes, something worth building a life around. Their marriage had been happy in the quiet way that real partnerships are. Elena taught 2nd grade and filled their small house with laughter and noise. Chris worked his way up from construction worker to foreman, building the kind of steady life his father had never managed. When Tyler was born, Elena had taken one look at their son and declared him perfect, even though he'd arrived 6 weeks early and spent his first month in the NICU. Cancer had taken Elena slowly, giving them time to say goodbye, but not enough time to prepare Tyler for losing his mother. Chris had learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, to navigate parent-teacher conferences alone, to be both mother and father to a boy who asked hard questions about why good people died young. The experience had taught him that some fights chose you, regardless of whether you felt ready for them. Looking at Emma now, seeing the same trapped desperation he'd recognized in domestic violence victims during his volunteer firefighting days, Chris realized this was one of those fights. "There's a women's shelter downtown," he said finally. "They have security, counselors who understand this kind of situation." Emma shook her head. "Marcus has connections everywhere. The shelter board includes people from his hospital. He'd find me within hours." She looked out the window at the coffee shop, where normal people were living normal lives, unaware that someone in a torn wedding dress was planning her escape from a man who wanted to own her completely. "I need to disappear," she said quietly. "Really disappear. New name, new city, new life. The kind of disappearing that takes resources I don't have." Chris understood what she wasn't saying. Emma was trapped not just by Marcus's threats, but by her own lack of options. She'd given up her independence gradually, letting Marcus control her finances, her housing, her connections. Now she was completely dependent on a man who saw her as property to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Tyler tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can't she stay with us? Just until she figures out what to do?" It was the kind of innocent suggestion that cut straight to the heart of the problem. Chris lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in southeast Portland. He worked construction jobs that barely covered rent and childcare. He had no experience with witness protection or domestic violence resources. Getting involved with Emma meant putting Tyler at risk, disrupting the careful stability they'd built after Elena's death. But Tyler was looking at him with Elena's eyes, waiting to see what kind of man his father really was. And Emma was sitting in his passenger seat like a bird with broken wings, having trusted him with her life, based on nothing more than a moment of kindness in downtown traffic. Chris started the engine. "We'll figure something out," he said, not sure if he was talking to Emma or himself. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." As they pulled back into traffic, Chris caught Emma's reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time since she'd thrown herself in front of his truck, she looked like she might actually believe she could survive this. The spare bedroom in Chris's apartment had been Elena's craft room, then Tyler's playroom, and for the past year, a storage space where broken furniture went to die. Now, as Chris cleared out boxes of Christmas decorations and Tyler's outgrown clothes, it was becoming Emma's sanctuary. "You don't have to do this," Emma said for the 10th time that evening, standing in the doorway wearing a pair of Elena's old sweatpants and a Portland Trail Blazers t-shirt that hung loose on her frame. She'd taken 3 showers since arriving, scrubbing away the remnants of her wedding makeup and the expensive perfume Marcus had chosen for her. "Yes, I do," Chris replied, wrestling with a folding bed that seemed determined to fold everything except the way it was supposed to. "Tyler's right. We can't just drop you at a motel and hope for the best." Tyler emerged from his room carrying an armload of blankets and his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Mr. Rex can sleep with you tonight," he announced, placing the well-worn Triceratops on the pillow. "He's really good at keeping away bad dreams." Emma's eyes filled with tears she quickly wiped away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Both of you. I don't understand why you're being so kind to strangers." "You're not a stranger anymore," Tyler said with 8-year-old logic. "Strangers are people you don't know. We know you now." Over the following weeks, Emma became part of their routine in ways that surprised all of them. She was there when Tyler got home from school, helping with homework at the kitchen table while Chris finished work. She learned to make grilled cheese sandwiches the way Tyler liked them, with the crusts cut off and the cheese melted just enough to stretch but not drip. She read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, something Chris had never been able to master. The transformation wasn't immediate. Emma jumped at sudden noises, kept her phone on silent, and checked the locks on all the doors multiple times each night. She had nightmares that left her pacing the small living room at 3 in the morning, afraid to go back to sleep. Chris would find her there sometimes, curled in his recliner with a cup of tea, staring out the window like she was watching for headlights that might belong to Marcus. "Can't sleep either?" he asked one Thursday night, finding her in her usual spot. Emma looked up, embarrassed to be caught in her vigil. "I keep thinking he's going to find me, that he's watching the building, waiting for the right moment." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I know it's paranoid." It's not paranoid if someone's actually trying to hurt you, Chris said, settling into the couch across from her. Elena used to have nightmares after her first round of chemo. She'd wake up convinced the cancer was spreading, that every headache or sore muscle meant it was coming back. How did you help her? I listened. I didn't try to fix it or talk her out of being scared. I just sat with her until the fear got smaller. Chris leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Fear doesn't go away because someone tells you it's irrational. It goes away when you feel safe enough to let it go. Emma studied his face in the dim light from the street lamp outside. You really loved her. Still do. That doesn't change, just because she's gone. Chris's voice was quiet but steady. Tyler asks me sometimes if I'm sad that Mom died. I tell him I'm sad she's not here anymore, but I'm not sad that I got to love her. Even knowing how it ended, I'd choose her again. Something shifted in Emma's expression, a wall coming down that she'd kept carefully constructed since arriving at their apartment. I don't think I've ever been loved like that. The way you talk about Elena, the way Tyler talks about her. Even Marcus, when he said he loved me, it felt like he was talking about owning something valuable, not caring about someone real. That's because it wasn't love, Chris said. Love doesn't hurt, it doesn't control, it doesn't make you smaller. Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this. I used to think I was too picky, too demanding. Marcus would tell me I expected too much, that real relationships required compromise. When he got angry, he'd say it was because he cared so much, because I was pushing him away. That's not compromise. That's manipulation. Chris had seen enough domestic violence situations to recognize the patterns, the way abusers rewrote reality to make their victims question their own instincts. Compromise is deciding where to go for dinner, not letting someone decide who you're allowed to be. Over the next few weeks, Emma began to reclaim pieces of herself that Marcus had systematically erased. She started wearing her hair in a ponytail instead of the elaborate styles he'd preferred. She laughed at Tyler's jokes without checking to see if it was appropriate. She began offering opinions about everything from dinner plans to Tyler's science project. Tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Chris watched this transformation with something that felt dangerously close to admiration. Emma was funny in unexpected ways, quick with comebacks that made Tyler giggle and observations that caught Chris off guard. She was also incredibly competent, organizing their chaotic lives with the efficiency of someone trained in event management. Their apartment had never been cleaner, their schedules never more coordinated, but it was the small moments that undid him completely. Emma teaching Tyler to fold origami cranes while Chris cooked dinner, her hands guiding his with infinite patience. Emma falling asleep on the couch during movie night, curled up like a cat in the corner, Tyler's dinosaur still clutched in her arms. Emma singing while she did dishes, her voice soft and unself-conscious, filling the apartment with something that felt like home. The first time she hugged him, it was after Tyler's school play. Chris had missed the performance because of a work emergency, arriving just as parents were filing out of the auditorium. Tyler had been disappointed, but philosophical about it, used to the unpredictability of construction schedules. Emma, however, had recorded the entire play on her phone and narrated Tyler's parts with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator. He was amazing. She told Chris as they walked to the car. He remembered every line, even when Jennifer forgot hers and he had to improvise. She pulled out her phone, already queuing up the video. You have to see this part where he delivers the speech about friendship. They sat in the parking lot watching Tyler's performance on a tiny screen, Emma pointing out details Chris might miss, her excitement infectious. When it was over, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. He's such a good kid, Chris. You've done such a good job with him. The hug happened without planning, Emma reaching over to squeeze his arm in a gesture of comfort that turned into something more when Chris covered her hand with his. For a moment, they sat there in the darkened car, connected by nothing more than shared pride in Tyler's accomplishment, and Chris felt something he hadn't experienced since Elena's death. The possibility of loving someone again. Emma must have felt it too, because she pulled back quickly, her cheeks flushed. "We should get Tyler home," she said, her voice carefully neutral. It's past his bedtime. The moment passed, but its echo lingered in the apartment like music heard through thin walls. Chris found himself noticing things he hadn't before. The way Emma's face lit up when she laughed, the careful way she touched broken things as if she could heal them, the fierce protectiveness she'd developed toward Tyler. She'd become part of their family so gradually that Chris couldn't pinpoint when it had happened, only that the apartment felt empty when she wasn't there. Emma, for her part, was learning to trust her own instincts again. Chris never raised his voice, never made her feel stupid for asking questions, never made her account for how she spent her time. When she offered to pay rent, he refused, saying she more than earned her keep by helping with Tyler. When she worried about imposing, he reminded her that families help each other, no questions asked. The word, family, had slipped out without conscious thought, but once it was spoken, it hung in the air between them like a promise neither was quite ready to make. Tyler, with the emotional intelligence of someone who'd already lost one parent, seemed to understand that Emma needed time to heal before she could fully trust again. He was patient with her fears, protective of her space, and generous with his affection in ways that broke Chris's heart with pride. When other kids at school asked about the lady living with them, Tyler simply said she was a friend who needed help, deflecting questions with the same matter-of-fact acceptance he'd shown when explaining his mother's death. "She makes good pancakes," Tyler told his grandmother one Saturday morning when she called to check in, "and she knows all the words to the songs from Moana. Dad can't sing at all." Chris could hear his mother's laughter through the phone, along with questions he wasn't ready to answer about Emma's permanent status in their lives. The truth was, he didn't know what came next. Emma was still legally married to Marcus, still vulnerable to his influence and connections. She had no job, no independent income, no clear path toward the kind of freedom that would allow her to build a real life. But she was healing, growing stronger every day, reclaiming her voice and her choices with the determination of someone who'd decided that survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to live, really live, and Chris found himself wanting to be part of whatever that looked like. The realization scared him almost as much as it thrilled him. Loving someone meant risking loss again, opening himself and Tyler to the possibility of another devastating goodbye. But watching Emma bloom in the safety of their small apartment, seeing Tyler's joy at having someone who understood his need for both adventure and security, Chris began to think that some risks might be worth taking. After all, he'd already chosen to stop for a woman in a wedding dress. Everything else was just details. The knock on the door came at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning while Chris was making breakfast, and Tyler was hunting for his missing science textbook. Emma had been living with them for 6 weeks, and they'd settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost safe. Emma answered the door without thinking, still wearing Chris's old flannel shirt and holding a cup of coffee. The man standing in the hallway wore an expensive suit and carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Chris's monthly rent. His smile was professionally warm and completely cold. "Emma Sinclair," he said, using her maiden name with deliberate precision. "I'm Detective Roy Brennan with Portland Police. I need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Emma's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound brought Chris running from the kitchen, Tyler close behind him. Chris took one look at Emma's face and stepped protectively in front of her. "What kind of concerns?" Chris asked, noting that the man hadn't shown a badge and that his shoes were too expensive for a cop's salary. "The kind that involve kidnapping charges," Brennan replied smoothly. "Dr. Keller has been very worried about his wife's well-being, especially after witnesses reported seeing her forced into a truck against her will on their wedding day." "That's not what happened," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. "According to multiple witnesses, including members of the wedding party, you appeared distressed and disoriented when Mr. Martinez here approached you. There's concern that you may have been coerced or threatened." Brennan's gaze shifted to Chris with predatory focus. "Construction workers do sometimes have gambling debts or other financial pressures that might make them vulnerable to certain arrangements." Chris felt Tyler move closer to his side, the boy's small hand gripping his father's shirt. The implication was clear. Marcus was claiming that Chris had been paid to abduct Emma, that her rescue had actually been a kidnapping orchestrated for money. "I've never met Dr. Keller in my life," Chris said steadily. "Emma came to me for help and I helped her." "That's your story," Brennan agreed. "Unfortunately, Dr. Keller has security footage from the hotel showing the entire incident. It's quite clear that Mrs. Keller was attempting to return to the safety of the hotel when you intervened and forced her into your vehicle. Emma laughed bitterly. Security footage can be edited. Marcus owns half the people in that hotel. Mrs. Keller, you've been missing for 6 weeks. Your family is concerned about Stockholm Syndrome, about the possibility that your captor has manipulated you into believing this situation is consensual. Brennan opened his briefcase, pulling out official-looking documents. I have a court order here requiring you to submit to psychological evaluation to determine your mental competency. Chris read over Emma's shoulder, his blood running cold. The paperwork looked legitimate, complete with judicial seals and legal language about emergency psychiatric holds. If this was real, Emma could be taken immediately for evaluation at a facility of Marcus's choosing, where doctors on his payroll could declare her mentally unstable and return her to her husband's care. This is insane, Chris said. She's been living here voluntarily. She's free to leave anytime she wants. Actually, she's not, Brennan replied. As her legal spouse, Dr. Keller has the authority to make medical decisions for his wife, especially when her judgment appears compromised. And frankly, Mr. Martinez, your interference in this matter has already put you in a very precarious legal position. Tyler tugged on Chris's shirt. Dad, what's happening? Why is this man being mean to Emma? Brennan's expression softened slightly as he looked at Tyler, but his voice remained businesslike. Son, sometimes adults make mistakes that put families in danger. Your father got involved in something he shouldn't have, and now we need to fix it before anyone gets hurt. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Chris's involvement with Emma wasn't just putting her at risk. It was threatening Tyler's safety as well. Marcus had found a way to use the system against them, turning Chris's act of kindness into evidence of criminal behavior. Emma stepped forward, her shoulders squared with sudden determination. I'll go, she said quietly. I'll submit to the evaluation. Emma, no, Chris protested. Once you're in his custody, he's already destroyed your life enough. Emma interrupted, her eyes meeting his with heartbreaking clarity. I won't let him hurt Tyler too. Some battles aren't worth fighting if they put innocent people at risk. But Tyler, who had been listening with the focused intensity he brought to complex problems, stepped out from behind his father. She doesn't want to go with you, he said to Brennan with startling conviction. And my dad didn't kidnap anybody. He helps people. That's what he does. Tyler, Chris started. No, Dad, this is wrong. Tyler looked up at Brennan with Elena's fearless eyes. My mom died when I was little, and lots of people tried to help us after that. Good. People help other people when they're scared. Emma was scared. And you're trying to make her scared again. Brennan's professional composure cracked slightly at being challenged by an 8-year-old. Son, this is a complex adult situation that you don't understand. I understand that you're not a real police officer, Tyler said matter-of-factly. Real police officers show their badges and don't wear shoes that cost more than our rent. And they don't make kids feel scared in their own homes. Chris stared at his son in amazement. Tyler was right. Brennan hadn't shown identification, and his entire approach was wrong for a legitimate law enforcement contact. This was theater designed to intimidate Emma into compliance. Show us your badge, Chris demanded, his voice gaining strength. Show us real identification, not just a business card. Brennan's mask slipped entirely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Mr. Martinez, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. Dr. Keller is a reasonable man, but his patience has limits. Accidents happen to people who interfere with family matters. Construction sites can be dangerous places. The threat was explicit now, confirming what Chris had suspected. This wasn't about legal authority or psychiatric evaluations. This was about Marcus using his connections to terrorize Emma into returning and eliminating anyone who stood in his way. Get out, Chris said, his construction worker's strength evident in his voice. Get out of my home, and don't come back without real police officers and real warrants. Brennan smiled without warmth. This conversation isn't over, Mr. Martinez. Dr. Keller values his privacy, but he values his wife more. One way or another, she's coming home. After Brennan left, Emma collapsed into Chris's recliner, shaking with reaction. He's not going to stop, she said. Marcus will keep escalating until someone gets hurt. Maybe I should just— No, Chris interrupted firmly. We're not giving up. But we need help. Real help. Tyler climbed into Emma's lap, wrapping his small arms around her neck. We're not letting the bad man take you, he declared. Dad always says families protect each other. Emma looked at Chris over Tyler's head, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to be part of a family that gets destroyed because of me. Too late, Chris said, sitting on the arm of the chair and putting his arm around both of them. You already are. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and planning. Chris contacted a lawyer recommended by his union, a woman who specialized in domestic violence cases and understood how abusers use the legal system as a weapon. Emma called her sister in Seattle, finally breaking months of silence to explain what had really been happening in her marriage. Most importantly, they contacted the real Portland police, filing reports about Brennan's impersonation of an officer and Marcus's escalating harassment. The responding officers took the situation seriously, especially after Emma showed them photos of her injuries from the wedding day, and Chris provided a detailed account of the fake psychiatric evaluation papers. But even as they took these steps, Chris knew they were playing catch-up in a game where Marcus held most of the cards. Emma was still legally married to a powerful man with extensive connections and unlimited resources. Their small family of 3 was about to face an enemy who played by different rules entirely. As night fell over their apartment, Chris tucked Tyler into bed with extra reassurances that everything would be okay. Tyler, exhausted by the day's drama, fell asleep clutching Mr. Rex and the promise that his family would still be together in the morning. Chris found Emma standing at the living room window, watching the street below for any sign of surveillance. We're going to get through this, he said, joining her at the window. Are we? Emma asked without turning around. Because it feels like Marcus is just getting started. Chris thought about the threats, about the resources Marcus could bring to bear against them, about the very real danger they now faced. Then he thought about Tyler's courage, about Emma's determination to protect them, even at her own expense, about the family they'd built from broken pieces. Yes, he said finally, we are. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Detective Sarah Walsh, a real Portland police officer investigating Brennan's impersonation, discovered that Marcus had made a critical mistake. In his desperation to discredit Chris, he'd hired Brennan to intimidate other women who'd tried to leave him before Emma. Dr. Keller has a pattern, Walsh explained during their meeting at the police station. 3 former girlfriends, all with similar stories, all afraid to come forward because of his connections. But when he sent his fake detective to threaten them too, they started talking. Emma sat in the sterile conference room, gripping Chris's hand as Walsh laid out photos and testimonies from women who'd escaped Marcus's control. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of systematic abuse, financial manipulation, and escalating violence that culminated in his complete obsession with Emma. The best part? Walsh continued. Brennan was wearing a wire. Seems he was more interested in protecting himself than protecting Dr. Keller. We have everything on tape. The recordings revealed Marcus's true nature in his own words. Threats against Chris and Tyler. Plans to have Emma declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized indefinitely. Casual discussions of violence that made everyone in the room go silent. 2 days later, Marcus Keller was arrested at his medical practice on charges ranging from witness intimidation to conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The media coverage was swift and brutal, destroying the carefully constructed image he'd spent years building. Chris found Emma standing in their kitchen that evening, holding the divorce papers that had arrived by courier. It's really over, she said, her voice filled with wonder. I'm actually free. Tyler bounded in from the living room where he'd been working on homework. Does this mean Emma can stay forever now? Emma knelt down to Tyler's level, her eyes bright with tears. Would you like that? Only if you want to be my mom, Tyler said with devastating honesty. Dad says love can't be forced, it has to be chosen. Chris watched Emma's face transform as she pulled Tyler into a fierce hug. I choose you, she whispered. Both of you, if you'll have me. The wedding happened 6 months later in their neighborhood park, with Tyler serving as both ring-bearer and officiant, courtesy of an online ordination he'd obtained specifically for the occasion. Emma wore a simple blue dress and flowers in her hair, Chris wore his best jeans and the tie Tyler had picked out because it had tiny dinosaurs on it. "Do you promise to love each other even when Dad burns breakfast?" Tyler asked solemnly, reading from notes he'd written himself. "We do," they said together, laughing through tears. As they kissed for the first time as husband and wife, Chris remembered that moment in downtown Portland when a woman in a wedding dress had thrown herself in front of his truck. He'd thought he was saving her life, but really, she'd saved his. She'd brought laughter back to their small apartment, healing to their wounded hearts, and completeness to their family of two. Emma had learned that love didn't hurt, didn't control, didn't make you smaller. Real love made space for your fears while giving you courage to face them. It protected without possessing, supported without suffocating, and grew stronger with time rather than wearing away. The three of them stood together in the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by friends who'd become chosen family, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone brave enough to run toward help instead of away from it. Sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.